cases, how they were implementing their strong points in their development. And if we are talking about Kazakhstan, we have implemented many how to say, lessons from the Singaporean experience. For example, our educational system, Bolashak, is being modeled based on the Singaporean experience. And groups of our national companies, Samruk Khazna, are also...
Right. Let us be back to the live broadcasting to our capital. We can see right now the President of Singapore, Halimah Yacob, is approaching the residency of President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, Akorda residency, and the welcome ceremony is about to start in a couple of minutes. Now we can see everything is ready for greeting, for welcoming the President of Singapore. Now we can see the welcome ceremony has just started. President of Singapore, Halimah Yacob, was greeted by Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, and now the welcoming ceremony is proceeding. Now the President of Singapore is being greeted by the Cabinet of Ministers of Kazakhstan, high-ranking politicians. We can see a range of ministers of Kazakhstan. Now she was greeted by Sayasat Nurbek, the Minister of Higher Education and Science, and now Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and Halimah Yacob are proceeding next to the representatives of Singapore delegation. I want to remind you that this year is 30th anniversary of this establishment of diplomatic relationships between two countries. And as your Sultan Janseedov just stated, Singapore was one of the first countries who recognized the independence of Kazakhstan. Now we can see that Kassym-Jomart Tokayev is being greeted by the representatives of Singapore delegation. The official welcoming ceremony will proceed. Now the two leaders will listen to the national anthems of two countries and the performance of National Guard of Kazakhstan.
Ricardo
So the two leaders have just listened to the national anthems of two countries. Now they will proceed to the series of bilateral meetings and discussions. And I will remind you that the political dialogue at the highest level is the basis of stable and friendly relations between Singapore and Kazakhstan. The visit of Singapore's first Prime Minister, Senior Minister Lee Kuan Yew, in September 1991 laid the foundation for political dialogue and set priorities for bilateral cooperation. It has been repeatedly noted that Kazakhstan considers Singapore as an important political and economic partner in Southeast Asia. The signing in 2003 of the Agreement of Trade and Economic Cooperation between the Ministries of Industry and Trade of the Republic of Kazakhstan and Singapore marked the beginning of the formation of legal framework between the two countries. And bearing all of this in the mind, so what are the milestones of our bilateral cooperation in your point of view?
My point of view, as if you've already mentioned, is a political cooperation, and the other dimension is trade and economics. We should mention that in the year 2022, the bilateral trade has reached $1.9 billion, and given the distance between Kazakhstan and Singapore, that's quite impressive. And we should also mention that it was around 30% increase comparing to the year 2021. So we are seeing the dynamics of bilateral trade. And the other dimension is education. As I've already mentioned, our national program Bolashak was based on the Singaporean experience, and now our leading university, Nazarbayev University, has close ties with the National University of Singapore, especially Graduate School of Public Policy and the Lee Kuan Yew Public Policy. There are student exchanges between those universities and cooperation on the highest level.
So what will be the perspective of our relationships? What will be in focus?
In my point of view, the key topic is cooperation in financial sector. Because if you are talking about the success of Singapore, of course there are many reasons, and one of the big reasons is that Singapore is a financial hub in Southeastern Asia. It is a financial hub for the countries of ASEAN and also for China. It is also like the window for the Western capital to enter the Asian markets, and we could copy it. And actually, we are following the similar logic here in Kazakhstan. Our Astana International Financial Center is again like in the same pattern, the same logic. So we have a lot of things to learn from each other.
So Singapore, as I understand now, is a big role model for Kazakhstan in both political and economic developments. So we have very similar political system. Maybe we have also educational background with Bolashak program, and also AFC was been operating as gate to Western international finances into this region.
And we also should mention that given all the similarities, of course, there are things that are different. Singapore is actually a city-state. Well, in comparison, Kazakhstan has a 9th place by territory.
Yes.
And Singapore is located in Southeastern Asia, in the Malacca Strait, so it's much closer to the oceans, and we're a landlocked country. So given all the similarities, of course, we have differences as well. So in developing our national strategies, all of those factors are being taken into consideration.
Yes, that's for sure, that's for sure. And what is primary interest of Singapore in this region, if we are talking about Central Asia and Kazakhstan in particular?
I think it's about trade and economics, mostly about importing natural resources, oil, gas, metals, since we know that Singapore, one of the key strategies of Singapore was also in focusing on microelectronics since the year of 1970s. So one of the secrets of Singaporean success was about developing semiconductors, and for that Singapore needs to import a lot of rare earth metals.
So it's again the cooperation on the economic level.
Yeah, mostly economic level, but also, as if I have mentioned, political cooperation and educational.
So again, we are talking about critical raw materials from Kazakhstan.
Not only, but also oil and gas. Also about food security. We know that Singapore doesn't have much territory, and Singapore is importing a lot of products from the neighbors, like even drinking water from Malaysia. So in that case, Kazakhstan, but given the territorial distance, still can be one of the reliable partners for Singapore, especially in the topic of food imports.
Yeah, so you also mentioned that 2022 was very good for bilateral trade. So how do you see the perspective of developing economic ties, trade with Singapore in the nearest perspective, maybe nearest 1 or 2 years?
As we have already mentioned, we're seeing the dynamics like plus around 30% of increase in international, in bilateral trade. So we see a clear trend on increasing all those ties. And Ms. President of Singapore, she already mentioned yesterday that Kazakhstan is also interesting for Singaporean companies in operating here in our country, especially in the sectors of transport and logistics, the dry ports. So we see now that the trade between trade through Kazakhstan is increasing, especially given the program, the Chinese program One Belt One Road. So the Singaporean companies will be also interested in participating.
So Singapore wants to play its role, its own role in this also transit route.
There are possibilities for the companies from Singapore as well.
So how many companies approximately operate
I'm
in
not sure
Kazakhstan?
about the exact number, but we could say that there is a trend on increasing of them.
Increasing, we can see the increasing trend. And my last question, maybe to sum up, to recap what we just talked about. So what is the success story of Singapore? What is the main story, and what can we take it as an example and to implicate it here in Kazakhstan?
The success story of Singapore is actually quite hard because it started from the year 1965. When it gained its independence from Malaysia, but people say that they didn't really want to gain the independence, but they just were in the fact they were independent. So ever since Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore at the time, he was following a strict campaign against corruption. He was attracting foreign investment, and as I've already mentioned, the Singaporean government was focusing only on those sectors that are beneficial for the country, like microelectronics, biotech, and for now they are quite successful.
That man made a history, that's for sure,
we mentioned that in the year 1965, the GDP per capita was $400, and now it's around $65,000, so it's a big difference. And one of the key successes is human capital, education. And if we look closer to the Singaporean system of education, they are always preparing their children, their students for the future workplaces, and they're keeping their competitive. So that's the thing, that's the topic and the field where we could cooperate with Singapore closer, in my opinion.
So it's, if to sum up, it's education, financial centers, finances.
Focusing on key sectors where you have advantages.
Yes, and political multilateralism as well. Thank you very much, Yushaltan, for your time and for your answers. That's it for today. Stay tuned and watch us on Silkway TV channel. See you later.